Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation podcast.
Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation, where our experts bring you fresh ideas and new perspectives on how consumers eat, drink, shop, groom and think. Each episode features a discussion of current topics, from the latest consumer trends and new products to shifts in markets and lifestyles. I'm Andrew McDougall, Associate Director of Beauty and Personal Care at Mintel. And today I'm joined by three of my colleagues around the world, all working from home. But thank you very much each for joining me. Rui, Toby and Marissa are all on the line. And today we're going to discuss the COVID-19 outbreak, focusing on our expertise in consumer behaviour and what this means. And we'll also be looking at what other markets can learn from China, given that timelines are all different right now. So first and foremost, thank you all again for joining me on the podcast. If each of you just want to give a short introduction to who we are, should we start with you, Rui?
Hello, thank you everyone. My name is Rui Xu. I am the head of reports of North APAC. I've been with Mintel for 7 years now.
Hello, I'm Marissa Gilbert. I am Mintel's U.S. Associate Director of Health and Wellness. I've been with Mintel for over 5 years.
And I'm Toby Clark. I'm the EMEA Director of Research, and I've been with Mintel pretty much forever. I think it's almost 20 years now.
And you don't look a day over 21, Toby, either, which is just boggling, absolutely mind-boggling.
I'm feeling a little bit older than that today.
Well, hopefully by the end of this conversation, you won't be feeling even older. But to start with then, as I say, it is that very sensitive topic and very relevant topic right now of COVID-19. As I mentioned before, we're kind of all working from home in different areas. So we have Marissa in the Americas, we have Toby in Europe, and Rui also in Asia. So what I wanted to do to start with was really looking at how the impact of the outbreak is affecting consumers in different ways in different markets, but also with the news that China are further ahead in the process or down the timeline than the rest of the world. And now they're looking to lift certain restrictions, for example, in society. It would probably be good to start with you, Rui, with the sort of current state of play in China and the biggest impacts that we've seen in China on consumer behavior.
Thank you, Andrew. I think, yes, to start with, just to give everyone a bit background of where China is now and sort of life over the last 2 months. As everyone knows, China started cities lockdown since the end of January. And after the last 2 months, I would say now most of the business outside Hubei province are coming back to normal operations. And even Hubei province, from the government's announcement this week, they will lift the lockdown of Hubei and even Wuhan from the 8th of April. So I think just as different markets are going through the situation at different stages, there will be different feelings, initial nervousness, confusion, and then people start to adapt to changes in their lives and calm down and relax a little bit. So in terms of impact on the consumer behaviors, we obviously see a lot of consumers feeling, their lifestyles are being impacted because of reduced outdoor activities, social distancing measures, but also more safety and hygiene measures. We have the latest tracker data on China to support all these things are happening in place. But also we are seeing actually people have spent more in making their living at home more pleasant or enjoyable. I think that pursuit of life quality, once you have, things start to cool down and start to relax a little bit, life quality is still an important factor in people's lives. So we're seeing, shifts from dining out to paying more attention to home cooking, growing sales of snacks, and to, purchasing of gaming, fitness equipment, and even for home working furniture. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, when consumers' life all of a sudden, are more confined to a small space, but how to enjoy themselves in living at home, working from home is definitely provides a lot of opportunities for business. And related, it gives people more reasons to try new experiences. What we have noticed is definitely online shopping of fresh groceries have, had a huge pike in the last 2 months. So definitely people are, trying new things and adapting.
Yeah, it's really interesting you mentioned about sort of the working from home and how behaviors are now changing as well. I mean, from my perspective, looking at beauty and personal care, it's things like, are people going to be washing their hair on a daily basis? Do we have more time to do hair treatments or different skin treatments? So it really is interesting to see how sort of behaviors are changing. For you, Toby, and for you, Marissa, obviously being in Europe and the US, slightly sort of earlier in the timeline, I guess, with this type of outbreak. But Europe is now being seen as the epicenter of the outbreak. The US, it does seem like the situation is rising there. I mean, is there any sort of similar things that you're seeing now in your markets with regards to consumer behavior? Or is there anything strikingly different?
So we're probably, I guess maybe 6 weeks behind China. And it's interesting, so much of what we've seen in China, we've seem to be following a similar pattern. So we had stockpiling of dry goods, of tin goods, of all those sort of store cupboard essentials. That was that sort of initial phase of panic and concern. But, really talking about increased sales of home and office equipment, of electricals, I mean, that's already starting to come through in the UK and Europe, for sure. I mean, I think Dixon's Carphone Warehouse is talking about having really, really strong sales over the last couple of weeks with people basically cocooning. So whether it's freezers or TVs or games consoles, people are trying to find ways of passing the time.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're seeing exactly the same thing in the US. Early grocery shopping, stockpiling of hand sanitizer, sort of the things to protect people against germs. And then, of course, now as people are settling into shelter in place, about 2/3 of the US right now has stay-at-home orders. People are starting to make their homes command central and stocking them up accordingly so that they can be as comfortable as possible.
I think a great sign of British behaviour. Like, we love our gardens and we love our booze. And so you can see, I mean, all the gardening home decoration websites are so slow, so over capacity. And basically any online booze retailer seems to be pretty much out of stock at the moment. So you can see Brits are following type. Like, they want to potter about and garden, and they want to do it with a big glass of wine.
Toby, I heard the news about British people, like queuing to buy chickens. Is that true? Or
I mean, that's the other thing British people love. Like, we love a queue. So I think people are going to be queuing for anything. I mean, a lot of it, I think, actually is really, really, there's been some really harsh criticism of shoppers. I don't know if it's the same in the US, but a lot of criticism of stockpiling and panic buying and selfishness, which I actually think is being really unfair. I think it's more a reflection of a lot of people making a small shifting in purchasing patterns. And all you need, I mean, there's millions of people in the country. You only need a small shift in behaviour for that to have a big impact on supply chains and stock levels.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's been a lot of queuing, but I think it's the idea that it's selfish hoarding, I think, is really, really unfair on consumers.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. We've had a shift in recent years of people taking smaller shopping trips and just picking up sort of what they need in the here and now versus making really planned trips, especially in urban centers and even suburban areas. So yeah, I think that it's just people were making bigger purchases in preparation for having to stay home. And that, of course, had a look that made people look like they were panic buying.
Nick Carroll, our grocery analyst in the UK, made a really, really smart analogy, which is basically the supermarkets spend all year planning for Christmas to make sure stock levels are sorted, and they're facing a demand spike probably in excess of Christmas with no prep. So I think it's no wonder there've been shortfalls.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even though we're in the midst of cold, cough, and flu season, hand sanitizer as a product, wasn't something a lot of consumers were turning to protect themselves from germs. So the spike that we experienced in the U.S. was unprecedented because, trends had been turning away from hand sanitizer. And so companies scrambled really to make sure that they had that in stock for consumers. And the same for antibacterial wipes with consumers leaning more towards natural are starting to lean more towards natural ingredients in their household care products. People realized that maybe bleach wasn't in many of their products, and so they were, scrambling to get to the store to pick up those more effective cleaning products.
That's a really interesting point as well, because especially, again, from the beauty perspective, we sort of see it thinking, well, are we now going to see cleansing products, for example, are sort of given more priority now, sort of these base level products, as people look at personal hygiene as being a lot more important. But do you think now as well, off the back of what you're saying there, that health and safety are going to become a much bigger priority for consumers in comparison to other trends such as sustainability, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're definitely going to see safety become a new component or a stronger component of people's health management. Safety against germs, safety against, other sort of the unknowns that consumers might be facing. But cleanliness, for sure, I think that is going to become something that consumers are going to expect to see more of from brands moving forward still. I think in the US, and I'm sure globally, a lot of brands have been sending emails saying what they're doing to protect their customers and their employees in terms of cleaning in the stores. And I think that expectation, sometimes you're like, weren't you cleaning well before? And now I think there's going to be that expectation that cleanliness will persist well after.
Andrew, I think you touched on a very interesting point, and I think we have been talking to clients asking the same question. So when online delivery is, there's so many orders for online deliveries during the quarantine period, and it's hard for consumers to say, I don't need those products just because, I want to be environmentally friendly, or the packaging waste and all that. I think it's very, realistic reaction. But for brands, it doesn't always mean it has to be a trade-off. So one thing I was noticing is in Europe and in US, sometimes if I go to the supermarket and buy packs of yogurt, and they don't come with plastic spoons, because I think you can make a choice whether to have them if you eat it on the go, or if you eat it at home, you actually don't need those plastic spoons. I think a lot of brands in China haven't realized that there's an opportunity here, given now there's so much snacking and like yogurt consumption is taking place indoor at home. So really, do we still need to provide every yogurt cup a plastic spoon? Is that a way for consumers to feel actually I can change little, in my day-to-day behavior and help protect the environment? So I think we tend to think, okay, consumers are, have to do a lot of order a lot of deliveries now, so sustainability is not on top of their mind. I think there's a realistic reaction to that, but it's also important for companies to think outside, what they can do differently to help consumers manage.
I think, it's totally natural that cleanliness and hygiene are going to be right at the top of the agenda, and that's inevitable, and that's totally understandable. But I think this long-standing push towards sustainability and naturalness, these sort of product characteristics people have been looking for more and more in the last, 5-10 years, they'll naturally take a bit of a backseat at the moment, but I can't see this going away. And I think if you look, a lot of the social media coverage of the upsides of this crisis is like a lot of people talking about the reduction in pollution, about cleaner streets, about sort of, improved water quality, all these kind of discussions. In a way, you've got to wonder whether this tips the balance even more. Like, people see what the country can be like when some of this is taken care of. Maybe that shifts the emphasis even more. So yeah, I think hygiene will naturally be at the front of people's minds, but I don't think this is going to wipe out those other desires that consumers have got.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's going to just be a stronger balance for the products that lean natural. Consumers are going to want to know what those ingredients are doing, what the effectiveness of them, perhaps especially in the household cleaning space. I've realized some of the products I was buying, plant-based ingredients and things like that have a cleaning effect, but not a disinfecting effect. So I think just there'll be stronger communication moving forward as consumers will demand to know what the product ingredients are doing.
I mean, you've got a lot of these Cinderella products that people have not paid a lot of attention to for years. So, food, you've got ambient products, you've got store cupboard essentials. I mean, it's stuff like basic soap. I mean, so much the discussion has been around wash your hands with soap. And if you can't do that, use antibacterial. This is, in a way, it's like it's massive endorsement for quite traditional products that would have been seen as quite old school. But, bar soap is suddenly, this is the way to protect yourself.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting actually to see what comes off the back of this then, as you say, like these sort of traditional categories. Are they going to see this sort of rebirth now, this sort of reawakening? I mean, is there a way to predict what the best strategies will be looking ahead, sort of post-COVID outbreak? I mean, is this going to impact innovation and new launches? I mean, what can we expect in sort of the different markets, do you think?
I think in China, we do see a slowdown in new product activities during the initial period of the lockdown, and because people are having extended leave, or a lot of workers are still remaining in their hometown. But very quickly, I think at the end of February or starting early March, new product starts to, the speed start to recover. But very interestingly is now brands are speeding up NPD activities with launching products firstly online. I don't think this is necessarily totally new, because there are, Tmall, these online retailers have been partnership with brands to launch new products, flagship new products online. But I think this special condition just catalyzed all these changes to happen more. And I do think this is going to continue into the future. So if we log on to, for example, follow any brand on Tmall nowadays, they give you a lot of daily feeds about what's new today. And so you can actually see, in terms of new product launches, there's a lot of new excitement for you to, keep you logged onto the online retailers. So I think this really changes how consumers think, where they go shopping in the future. It's not just like whether it's online versus offline, a competition. I think our tracker data suggests even in March, 54% of consumers still have shopped in offline supermarkets and hypermarkets. And I think they've underwent a tough, challenging period. But if you look at how supermarkets, some of them are reacting in a very encouraging way. So if you go to some of the supermarkets now, they will give you a sanitizing wipe of the trolley just before passing the trolley on to the customer. So I think that kind of human touch, and really to show how the retailers care about their customer, is something that cannot be, replaced by just online activity.
It's not just new product development in terms of products, but I think there's a lot of innovation happening in terms of distribution. And this is one of the things that I found really, really interesting talking to Ruyi about. So Ruyi, when you're talking about local retailers and how they innovated with distribution and how they reached out to their customers.
Yeah, so I think we initially noticed a lot of, middle-aged and senior people have to try online shopping during the outbreak. But they realize sometimes compared to the younger generation, some of the shopping apps or websites are not exactly user-friendly for them. So the local supermarkets have actually reacted more quickly by taking orders on a WeChat group. So if you add a shop owner, and you can just talk to them or write down your grocery shopping needs, and they will get it delivered door to door as well. So I think this is something that probably e-commerce companies wouldn't do, because they have all those more sophisticated web design or app design for people to do online shopping. But just as the outbreak start to change people's online, how you do online shopping and how creative people can be, or in looking for convenience. There's a lot of new changes to how people could shop online.
I think that's an interesting innovation that is not happening so far in the US. And I think that as our older populations who are more vulnerable are in sheltering in place longer, it's going to be harder for them to get the goods they need delivered, as they might struggle with online shopping for grocery especially.
I'm definitely seeing some of that coming through in the UK. And I think there's not many upsides to this situation, but I think like one of the few upsides is sometimes it's the smaller companies that have got the agility to be able to really respond to those consumer needs like on the ground. And, around where I am, there's definitely been like a resurgence in interest in supporting local businesses, and the local businesses then supporting their community, and it becomes really symbiotic. And again, it's something that really, really stood out in my early conversation with Ruyi, and it's really interesting to see that I'm now not exactly the same thing in the UK.
Yeah, I think you're right. The whole community spirit and the positive side to come from this does seem to be more apparent. It does seem to have brought the best out in a lot of people. It's very easy to talk about sort of the panic buying and the stockpiling and the negatives, but actually there is this sort of community spirit as well, I think, that's grown. And hopefully that'll be one of these sort of legacy things that comes off the back of this now as well, that maybe it will sort of bring people sort of closer together in that sort of community culture spirit. We've spoken a lot there about the online sort of advantages, or the sort of the online boosts that we've seen. We saw back in 2003, when there was a SARS outbreak, that there was a boost in online activity and online sales in China. So what is the impact of the COVID-19 sort of legacy expected to have? Is it going to be much more on top of that? Because they're kind of already online shopping now. But also, what is the impact on companies and categories that rely heavily on physical retail as well? What is the impact going to be sort of long term?
I think, Andrew, this is a very good question. When SARS happened in China, I think about 17 years ago, it really gave the ecommerce business a strong, development and that boost. For COVID-19, I think the legacy is because so many people are already doing shopping online. It's interesting for those business or industries who used to think probably online is further away for them. For example, food service, right? People assume that, yes, you need to dine out physically in a restaurant, so online, why bother? At most it's food delivery. But I think the outbreak has pushed a lot of business to think about, hey, what if, people become, less, they encourage stay indoor. Are those offline business more vulnerable to risk? So how do I diversify? How do I manage those risks? I think that will be a big legacy for business after the outbreak. And I do see that companies are improvising. So, for example, I think we talked about this earlier with Toby, is Alibaba's Hema Fresh grocery delivery service. They have partnered with some restaurant chains by combining workforces. So because people are not dining out during the outbreak, you have the restaurants and staff to do not have any work at the moment. So Alibaba, what they have done is to combine the workforce, and so the restaurant staff could also help with delivery services. We also noticed some food service brands are diversifying their offerings, so they start to sell more packaged food and drink products, private label sauces, for example, or even fresh groceries. There's also a change of how you market yourself in online. So Xiaolongkan, for example, is a famous hot pot restaurant chain. We're seeing the senior management and some chefs now appear in live streaming to promote their products and how to how they enjoy cooking. So I think a lot of industries will realize that they have to embrace e-commerce at some point, and food service, all those changes they are experiencing now is the best example of this.
See, this is the thing, from the conversations I've had with Ru Yi, I mean, what any US American brand needs to do is get on the phone to Ru Yi, because so much of what she's talked about happening, we're starting to see coming through. And so, when she's talking about the shift in food service, I mean, Leon being really, really imaginative in terms of, physical food service outlets, shifting that to almost like a hybrid of ready meals or takeout. So you can go into Leon and get your food to take away, either have it hot or take it home with you. And again, that's something that we had picked up as happening. And I saw Leon doing exactly the same thing. I was like, yeah, okay, so really you saw it coming. I think there's that during the financial crisis or after the financial crisis. I mean, obviously this is a really different situation, but the brands that could improvise and could adjust and could respond and could really, really, were really good at supporting their customers. They were the ones that came out of it really, really strongly. And again, it's a totally different situation, but I think the general principle is there. The ones that treat their customers right can build loyalty that will last for a long, long time. The ones that don't might get that short-term benefit, but long-term, it's really going to hurt their relationship with their customers.
Yeah, I think too, just thinking about how brands are interacting with consumers digitally now has really expanded. There's more vulnerability between brands and consumers, finding places to connect online. And I think this shift too is going to persist. Brands have been more personal, gotten, sort of that we're all in this together approach. Nike just launched a new campaign in the US, and they're taking, sports have been canceled effectively, across the country and most of the world. So, they're taking the approach that this is us, team us, we're in this together. And I think that is sort of the sentiment too that has been starting to take hold in the US.
I think actually that's a really nice way of putting it. The brands that are going to do well are the ones that do have that team us, like we're in this together, let's support each other. It's easy to do on a local level, but big brands can still do it. And the brands that are going for self-preservation and we're going to look after ourselves first and try and undo the damage later on, people, they're not going to forget that.
Well, we've already seen sort of these blacklists circulating on social media, haven't we, of people sort of taking note of all the brands that are doing exactly what you're saying there, Toby. And it's almost like, well, when we do sort of get back to normality, whatever that is, then these big brands who've taken those steps may potentially see the hit. In some different regards. I guess sort of the final question I wanted to ask then was then looking then at what the future now means then, as we hopefully sooner rather than later take steps back to normality and hopefully we defeat and get over this latest outbreak. Is there going to be any going back now with regards to consumer behavior, or is this going to be permanently changed? And if so, how, why, and in what way are we going to see sort of consumer behavior sort of change? Particularly in different categories?
There's stuff that will stick. So the financial crisis, that changed consumer behaviour fundamentally. And even when the income squeeze eased, a lot of the habits which people took up in the aftermath of the financial crisis did stick. So we've never really got away from that savvy shopping sort of bargain seeking approach, which really kicked in after the financial crisis. I think some of it will fade. I do think that emphasis on natural, clean label, sustainability, it might take a backseat for now, but I think that still is a fundamental driver for consumers. So some of it, those big picture consumer drivers, they're still going to exist. But I think, as in the aftermath of SARS, I think, okay, so online in the UK is really, really well established. Online grocery in the UK is really established, but this is going to step it up to a new level. And then in other European countries, we've got report series in Germany, for example, and online grocery there is really, really small. This, I think, could have a similar sort of seismic effect as SARS had in China. So some of it will fade, but I think there'll be consumer groups that have changed their behaviours, and those behaviours will stick.
I think, Toby, it's interesting you have used the comparison of the financial crisis back in 2018. What we've noticed very interesting from the tracker data is a clear, drop in financial security immediately after the outbreak, because people are worried about whether their jobs will be there, or are they going to take pay cuts, etc. So I think what will change after this is it will give people more reasons to think about mindful consumption. So in the simplest sense, we see the younger generation who think they have family as their parents to support them financially, who may rely a lot on credit spending. Now, if you don't, become very independent, or you cannot land on your feet, you can see actually things could, bad things could happen, or you could become vulnerable. You might lose your job. So it could change people's shopping behavior and how they, look after their financial well-being by thinking more carefully about what is really important in their lives and how do they manage their consumption habits. So I think this shift into more, I don't necessarily think it's, cutting cost or going back to that saving mindset, but it's more about being cautious and mindful in managing consumption. What is really important? Do I really need this, or do I really just buy this because I can post a photo on Instagram or social media to showcase to others? I think that conspicuous consumption mindset might be shaken in the future because people start to realize what's more really important in their life.
I think that's actually a really good point. And we've seen the impact that the financial crisis had on the mindset of millennials. And so the millennials get so much grief, so much of the time for avocados and whatever, but that really doesn't ring true with a lot of our research. And what you've got is a generation that is mindful, that in a lot of ways is actually really conservative, that is, cares about the environment, that, like I say, is kind of much more risk averse than you'd expect. A lot of it is just old people complaining about young people, which they've always done. And so you can see the effect that's left on people's mindsets. And, this inevitably is going to have that sort of worldview shaping effect on Gen Z, for example. And even, the younger counterparts. This is the kind of thing that they're going to be talking to their kids about in 60 years' time. So it will have an impact on psyches. There's no way it won't.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is a life-defining moment for a lot of people. Even older adults haven't experienced something that is impacting the entire world at the same time. I think, too, it's really, as we kind of touched on earlier, brand ethics are going to be important here and now, how brands are responding. Big brands are responding to help little brands or just people, individuals, and how small brands and local brands are, supporting communities and things like that. I think that message is going to stick with consumers now, and that's how they're going to post-COVID look to support brands, as those that really stepped up and helped in this crisis.
I think that's a really important point you make there as well, about how this is something that so many markets are going through, rather than just being sort of somewhere, the other side of the world that you need to know about, but it's not impacting you so much. That the impact this is having on things like anxiety levels, as well as different behaviors, different ways that we're acting within our communities. I can't think of a time in my lifetime that there's been such a big impact like this. So it is going to be really interesting to see for the future what sticks and what goes going forward. But I think there will be, as Toby mentioned, and Rui as well, as yourself, Marissa, is that there are going to be a lot of these things that some will fade, but there will be these key things, whether that's the community spirit or the way that we shop. There are going to be sort of bigger, longer term impacts from this. Unfortunately, that is all we've got time for today. I know we could probably sit on here for another half an hour and talk even more so. I can't thank you all enough for today for taking the time out to have this discussion with us, and certainly for your input today as well. It's been really insightful and definitely gives an insight into what is and what will happen on a consumer level at this moment. So Marissa, Toby, Rui, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's also a good point for me to mention that we have a whole host of insights specifically looking at the COVID-19 outbreak in different markets around the world on the Mintel platform, if you have access to that. So please check that out if you wish. Also, to learn more about Mintel or for more information on any of our insights, then please head over to mintel.com. And also be sure to subscribe to Little Conversation wherever you get your podcasts. But all that's left for me to say is thank you once again to Rui, to Toby and to Marissa for joining me today. But also thank you for listening. Stay safe wherever you are and have a great day.